Hey, what's up? Zuko here, and today we're going to be taking a look at Hokusai from Phat Company, a pretty substantial release from the company as it's part of their luxury gift line, figures that aim to be highly detailed, more so than their normal releases, with a focus on atmosphere. Now this is the first figure released in this line, with 2 more in production actually, but yeah, luxury indeed. This is not a cheap figure. A limited 35,000 yen figure, and if you didn't pre-order this through the Good Smile site, then prepare to pay a pretty penny extra for the shipping on top of that. For a 1/7 scale figure, that's a lot to ask for, but I've always been a fan of the craftsmanship over sheer size when it comes to figures. And even judging from the prototypes, you could tell that Phat Company were really aiming for something special here. Also, look at this freaking box, constructed with no windows at all, featuring classic Japanese art pieces from Hokusai, and even using reflective gold all over. What a good first impression. I guess if you have judgmental family or friends, this will certainly hide the fact that you just bought a $300 anime waifu figure from them. Might even make you look more cultured to them as well. But anyway, let's get this box open and see what Hokusai is all about. Assembly for Hokusai is actually not too bad at all, mainly thanks to how the birds come 99% pre-assembled, which was pretty surprising. I really thought they'd make us put these pieces in ourselves, but there was a huge sigh of relief knowing I wouldn't have to fiddle around with extremely tiny pegs. Putting her on the base though is a cakewalk, 4 simple plastic pegs that keep her secure in place. You want to be careful with the pull for the brush, however, as it slides from the top, resting dangerously close to the pins in her hair, which are extremely thin. With the right angle though, it should push through just fine, and you'll sort of push the hand onto the pole to snap it into place. The brush has a peg with grooves on it to align it correctly with the pole. Just make sure the pole is twisted in the right angle so that the bristles are resting in the appropriate spot. Additionally, there are some burrs that need to be slotted onto the brush itself, and maybe you'll have some better luck than I did. But my god, this took me an unreasonable amount of time to set up, and I'm not embarrassed to admit that because the surface area you're dealing with is not exactly designed for easy insertions. I could just have pieces with pegs or holes that aren't sculpted perfectly, making assembly tougher than it should be, but that was my experience. You know, if I wasn't reviewing Hokusai, I would probably just leave these pieces off of the figure, as I'm kind of worried about them falling off, and while they wouldn't break from that fall, I would be concerned that I would never find these pieces again once they reach the bottom of my floor. But enough about the birds, let's talk about the wave. This massive chunk of plastic that slots into the base with metal pegs this time is the X factor of the figure. It's like Phat Company is making a statement with this piece. You want luxury? Oh, we'll give you luxury. And I gotta say, this is a phenomenal piece of plastic. The swirling, paint stroke-like wave formations constructed with semi-transparent blue and opaque white plastic is so visually striking and eye-catching that it really elevates this figure by a sizable degree, figuratively and literally. This is also how you'll attach Toto-sama to the figure. At this height, it seems a little perilous, but the connection does feel secure. For anyone who has seen pictures of Hokusai online, you may have noticed a clear support rod is now included in the figure. This is actually used to support the wave, not Toto-sama, though technically I'd say it still is for that reason, as you set it up right by him anyway. Basically, you could forego the rod altogether if you want to be a little bit daring, but should you? I don't know, it's up to you to decide. Yeah, so this figure's got a presence, man. For a 1/7 scale, she is huge and also extremely heavy, which shouldn't be surprising, right? You're dealing with a lot of plastic, both in the kimono and the water. But now that she's all set up, you get a sense for how grand this figure is. Pictures don't really do it justice. The presentation at first glance is as good as it gets. And for what is, in my opinion, a pretty ambitious figure, like turning that original art of Hokusai into a 3D scale model for us to enjoy, while not skipping out on any of the details that made that art special, I think Phat Company nailed it on this sculpt. As I like to do though, let's run through the rest of the figure now and talk about the individual components, starting with the head, as there is more to a figure than just the sculpt. There's a lot going on in Hokusai's hair, from the flower ornaments to the pin sticking out of her tied up bun in the back, and there's a couple of different patterns to each of these pins. I particularly am a fan of the flowers. And just to go back to the puffy, almost plush-like flower ornaments again, in the center of each one are clusters of pearls with a pearlescent finish. It looks really nice actually, and the extra splash of red from these orbs just make her hair pretty colorful, but in a reserved way, if that makes sense. It all blends together well with her hair color and sculpt, which overall looks very nice, though some of the purple flowers blend in a bit too much for my liking, which is primarily due to the lack of shading on either part. The little attention to detail of her curling her hair with her fingertips is pretty cute, and it brings a bit more focus to her face, a somewhat aloof expression with bright blue eyes that I wish had a little bit more detail to it. Perhaps it's the very basic and tiny mouth used here, or the lack of blush on her cheeks, but I can't help but feel like something is missing here to really enamor me. It's a slight nitpick though, because I still find her face to be pretty cute overall. As we move down the figure, we reach her chest, almost fully exposed thanks to the disheveled kimono, and it's lovely, a true advantage the figure has to the original art now that it's in 3D. Now you won't find any nipples on this figure, no surprise there, but the shape, the separation, the lack of a weld, and this one's just personal taste, but the size are all essentially perfect in my eyes. And due to the kimono revealing a majority of her upper body with the most convenient of censorship, I can't help but find this to be more than just fan service. It contributes to the beauty of Hokusai in a really tasteful way. Or perhaps that's just me justifying it, but you can't deny it looks great. But the kimono makes up a majority of the remaining figure, and there's some details on this that we've already discussed, such as the flower ornaments and that familiar purple and pinkish red color scheme. But we've also got her obi, giving us a much needed bright splash of yellow and orange in the center of the figure. The pattern along it is primarily a checkerboard with flowers and hexagons, but it's really how the sash was sculpted that impresses me. There's a ton of plastic dedicated to this sash, with so many different ties and ends that it's a chaotic mess of beautiful fabric. The parts that almost look like soft pillows are probably my favorite due to their thickness, and it's just really impressive looking all around. There's even that cool octopus symbol on the backside should you find yourself turning her around. As for the rest of the kimono, there's a similar level of cloth sculpting that is just as impressive, especially by her arms and at the bottom of the base. My first impression of the way the bottom portion looks was that it reminded me of an octopus, and hey, I'm sure that's exactly what they were going for. These large circular white patterns and these lines etched in black paint make up the design of the kimono, but of course those birds surrounding her can't be ignored either. There's not much detail to the birds, the plastic is a very foggy white, but every flock of the birds are important to making this figure stand out that much more. Besides the ones on the brush, I still don't care about those. I think it's important that they're here though, because not only do they look great as an effect piece, but once again, just like her hair, the shading throughout the kimono is very light. I think it's easy to ignore this fact due to the amount of detail on this figure, but it is still worth noting that the paint job does leave a little bit to be desired, even if the execution is pretty clean overall. As far as accessories go, the paintbrush looks awesome. Due to the sheer size of it, it can almost be seen as a weapon, but the swirls on the bristles have a very traditional Japanese art vibe to them. The tips of the brush have the appearance of being stained in ink, which is a really nice touch. Also the base, which I've yet to comment on, is a very simplistic circular disc with a rainbow of colors splattered on the edges of the front. Considering everything else going on in this figure, I think it's completely acceptable and I like it. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about how cool the waves look once again. I feel like I undersold that part of the figure, or I just didn't talk about it enough. But when Phat Company mentioned atmosphere being a selling point of the luxury gift line, I can only imagine this is what they were talking about. I think when pre-ordering figures, a piece like this gets overlooked a little bit. Yeah, you know it's included, but your focus is on the character for the most part, how they look and if it's worth it for them. Meanwhile, you have this behemoth of an effect part included, which is the perfect complementary piece for this figure, and turns this figure of Hokusai into a centerpiece for your collection. The stylized paint stroke path the Waves takes is just spectacular. The white spiky bits are placed in the perfect spots, and it surrounds her body in a really pleasing way. Toto-sama is literally the cherry on top too. He is so shiny and clean in appearance, and even with the support rod, I don't think it detracts from this figure's beauty enough to matter. If it wasn't clear by now, for whatever reason, I really love this figure from a sculpture standpoint. The construction of Hokusai, the kimono, the birds, the waves, and everything else are spot on perfect. And its larger-than-life's presence makes this figure stand out that much more. However, I do feel like I can't call this figure perfect as the paint job is lacking a little bit. I don't want to be too negative on this point because it's not a bad paint job. Overall, it is very clean, and I didn't find too many flaws in my search. I did find bits here and there in terms of quality control that aren't up to par with companies like Alter, Max Factory, or QSQ, but none of what I found were really enough to bother me to the point of being upset. It's mostly just the lack of shading that stops Hokusai from being perfect. But do I think she's worth the price tag? Well, while the yen is really weak right now, absolutely. If you're a fan of Fate, Hokusai, the artist in general, or just have an appreciation for cute girls in kimonos with like stellar effect pieces, then yeah, you're gonna love this. I think if you handed this figure to anybody, they'd love it too. But when you gotta bust out the wallet, that's when you gotta ask yourself how much you care about the finer details. Also, like I said earlier in the video, I personally think her face could look a tiny bit better, but for the most part, you're gonna see the impressive sculpt first before the smaller problems, and it's one of those figures where the sculpt is the main selling point. I think it also feels more premium due to how heavy this figure is. Both Hokusai and the waves make moving this figure around a job not to take lightly. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about Hokusai. Do you like her? Do you not? Do you plan to pick her up? Leave me a comment down below, and I'll be sure to read it. Thanks for watching my video, though. I appreciate it. Until next time, though, I'll see you later. Bye.